by bearing witness that there is no deity worthy of worship except Allah, and the last and final messenger is the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu and the best and salutations be upon him, his family and companions, and all those who walk this path to the day of judgment. And upon us we intend to learn and to teach, to be reminded and remind others, and to be benefited and to benefit others, and to hold on to the book of Allah and the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu, and to call to good and pointing people towards it, seeking Allah's good pleasure and His reward. Ameen. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And we continue the lessons on the book Treatise for the Seekers of Guidance by Imam al-Muhasibi. May Allah be pleased with him. And what we covered in the previous lesson, the attributes of the people who sit in the company of Allah. And we explained these conditions or these attributes. So when the Prophet ﷺ said, those who will be sitting in the company of God, of Allah on the Day of Judgment, are the subservient, the humble, the fearful people who remember Allah a lot. These are the people. They will be the ones who will be sitting in the company of Allah in this world and then in the Day of Judgment. And we explained this matter. So one should strive in the hope that Allah Azza wa Jal will write us from amongst them. Take a portion from the meaning of subservience. Take a portion of humility. A portion, maybe in hope that you may enter amongst them. Take a portion of those who are fearful, and take a portion of remembrance of Allah, those who remember Allah Azza wa Jal, because sitting in the company of Allah will be based on how much you sat in the company of Allah in this world. And as long as you are remembering Allah, you are in His sitting company. So if you were to accumulate in yourself these qualities of subservience, humility, fearful, remembrance of Allah a lot, and etiquettes, then you'll be from those who are sitting in the company and those who are brought close. And people who sit in the company of Allah are of different types and different levels. For instance, if there is a lecture where there is 1,000 people in that gathering, then those 1,000 people are considered those who are sitting in the company of that scholar. But the one who sits at the end of the gathering, is he like the one who sits in the first row? Is the last row like the first row? Maybe 10 rows or 20 rows could be in one mosque, like in a big mosque. But is that mosque the same? Is the one who sits in the front row the same as the one who sits in the back row? No. So the more you are in zikr of Allah, the more you have etiquettes before Allah, the more you have humility before Allah, you will attain this companionship and the sitting companionship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then you'll also be from those who are close to Allah. So we asked Habib asked Allah that He makes us from amongst them. And then we'll now continue the hadith on sincerity and counsel. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful. Treatise for the seekers of guidance. May Allah make us benefit from Him, and may we be united with Him and all of our teachers in the highest of abode. He says, be sincere with Allah and His Messenger, and give sincere advice to the believers. Consult those who fear Allah in your affairs. Allah mentions rather of His servants, the knowledgeable ones fear Him. And the Prophet ﷺ said, the religion is giving sincere advice. So he says, basically, the author, may Allah have mercy on him, be sincere with Allah and His Messenger, and give sincere advice to the believers. The Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith that this religion is sincere counsel. And they said, to who? Is to Allah and the Prophet ﷺ and the common amongst the Muslims. So nasiha or nasiha for Allah, what does that mean? Or expending or striving or to try one's best to give nasiha or sincere advice to people. Badal means that there is effort put, that there is reflection. When you advise your brother, you don't just think, you don't just say a thought that occurs to you. You reflect, or you've gone through a situation which is similar to his situation. Your friend, your brother, your neighbor, he wants to do a particular thing, and you have already done that thing. So in other words, you have experience. So you give sincere advice, and then the advice is of two types, uh, or two levels. One is to give advice before you were asked, and this is a sign of love. If your brother comes to you and he gives you advice without you asking, know that he loves you and he is concerned about you, and he is someone who holds you in great esteem, and you have a place for in his heart. So giving advice in this matter is a great thing, and giving advice becomes obligatory if your brother requests from you an advice. Giving advice, if your if your if your brother comes to you and says, I have I have such a situation, how would you advise me? At that moment, the advice, the nasiha, will become obligatory. So at that moment, you need to give advice, and you need to be sincere in that advice, and you need to be trustworthy. You should be sincere, and you should be trustworthy, just as you would love for yourself, you would love for others. So, 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 advice for Allah, or nasiha with Allah, it doesn't mean giving advice. It means you are sincere with Allah. Meaning, if you're advising your brother, don't expect that you would get a reward, or you'll get a source, or you'll get something out of it. No, you're doing it for the sake of Allah. You're advising him for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. The other meaning is of advising or nasiha for Allah is that our mutual counseling is with regards to Allah, is for the sake of Allah. Meaning, if I say to my brother, I am advising you and I counsel you to fear Allah, then that means it's for the sake of Allah. If a person says, I advise you to be good to your parents, so this is specifically for the believers. You have your counseling is specifically for his parents. Or if you say, I counsel you, or I'm advising you, or look after, you're basically saying look after your kinfolk, or look after your blood relations. And similarly, if we remind each other or counsel one another about Allah's lordship and Allah's dominion, for instance, if we say, be watchful of Allah, or be observant of Allah, or have muraqabah of Allah, this is also counseling for the sake of Allah. And then the hadith says, advice to the believers. So you advise your brother to become a true believer. So we say, be concerned about your neighbors, or be concerned for your friends, as in, so every believer should be a recipient of the advices that you may have. So it could be some believer that you meet, a mu'min. So it's not enough to merely say salams and he says wa alaikum salam. This is a good thing. But if you were to advise him, meaning if you were to by chance see, or you were to see some mistake or some harm in him, then it becomes important for you to advise him. But if there's a person you don't know, you have no and you have no relationship with him, or you have a neighbor in the building but you don't know anything about him, what would you advise him? You don't know him. So the advice would be the generic or the general advice, meaning is for the sake of Allah, meaning we advise one another to obey Allah and to be fearful of Allah and conscious of Allah. Then the ulama say that from the signs of safety from wretchedness or from failure is the presence of mutual counseling amongst the believers. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, by the time truly humankind is in loss except for those who believe and those who counsel one another towards truth and counsel one another towards patience. Also, so you would be safe from failure. And what is this failure? The verse comes in Surah Al-Asr in general, about the general loss and failure, that truly humanity is in loss. They're in loss in this world and the hereafter, except for those who believe and those who counsel one another towards truth and towards patience. Counseling is the profession of the prophets. And they say, there are many verses where the prophets say that I am sincere counselor to you, and I've counseled you already, but you don't like counselors, you don't like those who advise you. Also, from the benefits of giving advice or counseling people is that you will be safe from that person pulling you down in the Day of Judgment, where he would say, oh Allah, that person did not advise me when I was walking the path towards destruction. So the benefit of advising one another is firstly, it is beneficial for the believer, benefits from it, because Allah says because reminders benefit the believers, the mu'min. And then he says and also know that advising one another is not just for the one who is falling short in something with some deficiencies. So the mutual counseling is also between the righteous and the ulama. In fact, this is from the characteristics of the righteous. So if you want to know whether you are from the righteous, what are their attributes? What do the righteous do? They do righteous deeds. Do they have attributes? Of course. From the attributes of the righteous is that when they don't come together, or whenever they come together, they advise one another. Many people come together nowadays, have tea, and they meet, and they speak of everything, of things of the world, about issues that are happening, about corona, about the world news. Nothing impermissible, just information about the world, asking about how the work is, how the market is, like how a person would do if he hangs around with his friends or colleagues, but there's no mutual counseling. So for this reason, it is important that there be tanasuh, mutual counseling between believers, even if it's just saying to a person, fear Allah, or have taqwa. Maybe some people might get upset. They might say, what's wrong? Do you think I have some problem? You need to do it in an indirect, not a confrontational way. For instance, you put a topic, you mention a particular you mention a particular situation where you were in, where you did a mistake, and then you use your example that I learned from this, and then you say so there, and then you conclude by saying, this is why I'm advising you all to be careful in this matter and be fearful of Allah. And then he says um, consult those who have fear of Allah. Habib said before, what is the sign that a person has intellect, a proper or sound intellect? So from the qualities of one who has sound intellect is that he takes advice from people, and that he doesn't take quick decisions. He asks, he reflects, contemplates, he researches. This is a sign that the person has intellect or sound intellect. And we know that the one who makes decisions without thinking much is a hasty person. In fact, there's a proverb that in haste leads to regret, and for um, forbearance leads to safety, or patience leads to safety. Those who fear Allah. Who is the one who fears Allah? The ulama, the scholars. As if he's saying, I take advice from the ulama. They are the ones that you need to take advice from. They will give you an advice that would benefit you in the hereafter before it benefits you in this world. If you were to take advice from the people of this world, they will give you advice. They will give you advice um, in this worldly affairs only. So take advice from both. So the one who fears Allah will give you an advice with sincerity and truthfulness, not hypocritically, and he won't give you an advice that would harm you. Truly, of his servants, the knowledgeable are most fearful of Allah. And people nowadays, they take advices from the most for lowly people, and most ignoramus of people, and most sinful of the people, and they don't take advice from the ulama. An alim, and maybe the persons might say, if I go and take advice from this scholar, he won't understand. Maybe I have some questions regarding business and trade, and this scholar has no information about that, so he won't know. Firstly, you need to take advice from him with regards to Shari rulings. Is it permissible or is it not permissible? Is it halal or is it haram? And if it's permissible, then is it something that Allah likes, or is it something that Allah dislikes? On top of that, the advice should be with regards it should be an advice that has like some kind of a um, uh, uh, information, or something to do with the unseen realm, in the sense, meaning a believer who fears Allah has a firasa, has an inner sight. He may not be at the level of someone who knows the worldly sciences to give you explanation on the matter, but he would be someone who Allah inspires by showing him something from the unseen realm, uh, that he will then tell you whether this is good for you or bad for you. So we find people nowadays, how do they take advice? They they put their topic, they put their question on their account on Instagram or on Facebook or on their Twitter, and they say, what do you think if I do this? And then they take like a vote, a poll. Those people would put a like on it, or put a heart on it, or they'll retweet. who are these people that you're taking their opinion of? And then it'll be based, and then he'll make his judgment based on the poll results. A lot of people are doing this nowadays. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, this religion is giving sincere advice, that we have explained this. This religion of yours increases with giving sincere advice. Every one of us every one of us complains about their religion becoming deficient and deficient. What are the reasons for that? Primarily, the main reason is sin. Secondly, is belittling recommended actions, the sunnahs. True, sunnah is something that you will be rewarded for, not punished for leaving it, but that does not mean that your faith will be firm or will carry on increasing if you neglect the sunnah. If you leave a sunnah, you won't get reward, but at the same time you won't be elevated, and you won't have increase in your faith. Or the contrary, you will have deficiency in faith. If there's something that you can achieve but you don't, then your faith diminishes. Also, advice, increase in one's religion is through giving sincere advice. The more you are sincerely giving advices to other people, the more your faith increases, meaning your faith will get stronger and stronger. This becomes a person whose faith is strong, his religion is strong. Truly, religion in the sight of Allah is Islam, so he's firm and he's strong. So for this reason, you find a lot of Muslims, their religion is weak because they live by themselves. They don't advise others. They say, leave me in my own state. Why should I get involved in advising people? Maybe this person will get upset. Maybe they might say, who do you think you are to advise me? And some people would say, what's your business, or mind your own business. The worst thing is, or the most profane thing, is that when you sincerely advise a person for the sake of Allah, and that person responds by saying, don't get or don't poke your nose in things that don't matter to you. This is from the most disgusting things, and this person who's being advised has basically rejected the advice, meaning he's rejected what Allah wants from him. If a person comes to you with advice, that means Allah has sent you this person, this brother of yours, and you're rejecting this advice, then don't blame anyone except your own self. Know that the one who has given you sincere advice has displayed love for you. Conversely, one who has displayed a false face to you has betrayed you. Then he says, no, the one who has given you sincere advice has truly loved you, especially if he advises you before you ask from him. There are people, mashallah, a person calls you and says, I heard that you wanted to buy this car and this model, but I don't think you should buy this car because it has this manufacturing fault in it, or it takes a lot of petrol. This is my advice for you. So the one who advises you from his own proactively without you asking him, that is a sincere person. So also, is it obligatory for you to accept an advice immediately? No. You're supposed to reflect, unless of course the nasiha, the advice is about like taqwa, fear Allah, then you accept immediately. But if the nasiha is on some worldly affair, then you take the advice and you say thank you, jazakallah khair, and then you explain to him your situation properly, so that so this is why they say, if you request from a person, if you request advice from a person, then explain to him your complete situation. Don't just say a part of it, like for instance, I just want to buy a car. No, you need to explain to him, for instance, your budget or why you're buying a car. What will you do with this car? Do you want it for travels? Do you want it for just your shopping, or just what do you want it for? Know that the one who advises you has truly loved you, and if the advice comes to you, as Habib said, from a brother who before you even request from him, know that that advice has come from Allah, which means Allah has loved you. That Allah has. Do you know what this means? These are great words, and the advice may come to you, and pay attention. The advice may come to you in a dream, and that is what is called a warning dream. This is an advice, but it comes to you in a form. Um, this is usually between people who have love amongst themselves, or between you and your sheikh, where there is a spiritual connection, and this is the best and this is the strongest. If a murid or a student sees his teacher in the dream, where the sheikh says to him, do this or don't do this, mashallah, this is a great sign of his proximity to the sheikh and his love, and the love between them. And also it means that Allah loves this person, that he sent the sheikh, his sheikh, to you in his dream. And then there are people, mashallah, who see an angel that would advise, or they would see a companion of the Prophet, or he might even see the Prophet advising him in his dream. So we ask Allah that He grants us enabling grace to do that which pleases Him. Know that the one who has given you sincere advice has loved you. And conversely, the one who has displayed a false face to you has betrayed you. Mudahana, the people of Sharia say, is that is to sacrifice your religion for the sake of dunya. This is what the Prophet ﷺ referred to as the one who sells his worldly sells his religion for worldly affairs. Like for instance, I bought this pen. From 5 dirhams. So you give something and you get something back. So mudahana is when you sell your religion for the dunya. So the mudahana is a person who who gives more priority to his worldly life more than his religion. So the one who you take advice from and he only thinks about your worldly affairs, then he has cheated you, because he has. But the problem is also with you, because you took advice from him and he is not someone who should be taken advice from. If he's let's say he's a specialist in that particular field. A person, let's say he is a consultant on a particular topic, but he's not even a Muslim. You have a particular economic or financial or business, or even if there's a medical condition, but then there's a consultant who's not even a Muslim. You can take advice from him in his speciality, but you also take advice from those who fear Allah. Don't say, what's this doctor got to do with my medical condition, or you don't know. And how many murids took advice from their sheikh, and what they took advice from the sheikh was completely irrelevant. But they took the advice. And whatever the sheikh said happened, as in they took advice on matters that were unrelated to the sheikh. So the mudahana is the one who prioritize the world over the dunya. So don't just take advice from them. And then he says, one who does not accept your sincere advice is not your brother. So let's say you advised someone, your brother, for the sake of Allah, your friend, your colleague, and he didn't accept the advice, then he's not a brother. Why? Because he because you, when you advised him, you you were afraid, worried for him, you love him, as if as if he's saying, I don't want your love, I don't want your advice, I don't want your your concern from me. This is not a brother. One who does not accept your sincere advice is not your brother, especially if the sincere advice is in its right place and there's no excuse for him. Like, for instance, Habib mentioned, if a person advises you in in religious matters, then it should be accepted immediately. But if it's in worldly matters, then there could be a debate. There could be a not debate, a, a communication or a dialogue where the advice is explained further, the situation is explained further, and if you're not convinced by his advice, then you take advice to somebody else, and you say, but you say to him politely and nicely that, your advice I respect it highly, but I'm still not convinced, and I need to take advice from others. But uh, if a person advises you and his proof is clear and his words are correct, and there's no contradiction, then you should accept it immediately. But if you see contradiction, you've asked one person and another person and a third person, and then different people are saying different things, and there's confusion, then that's where the istikhara comes in place. He says, one who does not accept your sincere advice. So what about you not accepting his advice? What is worse than that is that you reject the advice of your parents. That you reject the advice of your parents. There's a difference between rejecting and and dialoguing the issue. For instance, the parents say something and you reflect. Maybe there's a room for dialogue. For instance, your mother and father say, I advise you to do this and this, and for instance, you're not fully convinced of that, but then you say with proper etiquettes that I just feel that this issue is, has this and this matter related to it. But if you see that they're insistent upon it, then you need to take it. So if your parents reach the point where from advice it reaches an order, then you cannot disobey. Of course, if it's something that has no disobedience to Allah Azza wa Jal. But then there's an important issue here about who who gives. We said the one who gives advice should be sincere, fearing Allah, and trustworthy. But as for the one who seeks advice, O you who seek advice from people, firstly, you should choose the person who should be a relevant person to be asked advice from. Secondly, you should be prepared to accept the advice, not just for the sake of trial and testing, and let's just see what this person will say, because this is considered from the avenue, or from the it's considered like wasting time. It's like, and then and then, for instance, you went and asked this person uh, about a particular matter, and then this person listens to your matter, and then he gives you an advice, and then later on you you go and do something opposite. So what should you do to not hurt him? Because he'll think, why is he doing? He asked me for advice, and 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 I gave him advice, and he's doing the opposite. You need to go and explain to him that your advice, I really reflected and pondered over it, but there were these issues uh, that I couldn't follow, and you mention to him properly with etiquettes, and especially if you take advice from your sheikh. Don't take advice from your sheikh except that you're ready to take it. Otherwise, you've put yourself in a difficult situation. Firstly, why won't you be ready? Why would you be hesitant? On the contrary, if your sheikh advises you, especially if your sheikh is from the Gnostics, from the Arif, who knows the Sharia and the Tariqah and the Haqiqah, then this is an order. An example would be what occurred in the life of Habib Hussain, that 20 years ago Habib had a situation which was like a fork. He reached a fork in his life. He either goes right or left, and he had to make a decision, and it took over his mind and his thoughts, because it would change his life completely. So some advised him something, and he did istikhara, but the decision was not clear. So Habib spoke to his sheikh, Habib Umar, and he said, I have this issue. So he told Habib to do what was difficult. So at that moment it was difficult, and the mind could not find an explanation for it, because the mind would say the advice is so difficult. But after 20 years now, Habib is saying that advice was in its perfect place, not 100%, a million percent. And I would have regretted had I not taken that advice. This is what Habib's saying. He's tried and tested. Sometimes the advice would be in its outward form. It's very difficult and has no explanation behind it. You'd be like, why is Habib saying that? I mean, I can't understand it. They are reading something. Allah inspires them in things and affairs of the future. In general, and one who does not accept your sincere advice is not your brother. And so Habib says, the one who does not accept the advice of his sheikh, he is not a murid. You reject the advice of your sheikh, and you may say, oh, he misunderstood me. If he misunderstood you, that means you explained it to him wrongly, so you're the one who's at wrong. So for this reason, our mashayikh are sometimes are really so careful with their murids, so that they don't put their murids in that dangerous situation. Sometimes so the sheikh can see sometimes that the student just wants to take barakah from the sheikh, and he's not ready to take the advice from the sheikh as a solid decision, but he just wants to take barakah. What does Habib say about this particular matter? But will his advice for you be a matter of final decision? There are people who would accept or submit all of their affairs to their sheikh, where he says right, they go right. When he says left, they go left without any doubt and debate. But then there are some who are uh, uh, some days following the Sheikh, some days off the Sheikh. And then there are some who just wants Fatiha from the Sheikh, just Barakah from the Sheikh. So for this reason, the Sheikh is more merciful towards you than your own self. So he finds you hesitant, and that his advice would not be something that you would take on resolutely, and you're just coming for barakah. Then he will say, "This is my opinion, but this is my opinion. But you do whatever you like." Because if he were to say, "This is my advice for you," and you don't take it, then you'll be in a dangerous situation. So he would say, "This is my opinion. Let me know." I mean, or they might even say, "What's your opinion?" He might even say, "What's your opinion?" So for this reason, if you take advice from your sheikh, if you take advice from the sheikh, then give him the responsibility, and then you take his advice as a final decision. It's not debated. Otherwise, be merciful to yourself and know your own level, your state. Allah will have mercy on the one who knows his real state, and stop yourself. Umar bin al-Khattab, may Allah be well pleased with him, said, "There is no good in people who do not give sincere advice, and there is no good in people that do not love those who offer sincere advice." These are the words of people of knowledge and people of who are well established in their knowledge. He's saying there's no good in people. There's no good in people who you sit with and they don't give you sincere advice. They see you falling in error. They see you making mistakes, but they don't give you advice. Why would you sit with them? Why are you sitting with them? If they see you walking in the wrong path, or that will lead you in some kind of difficulty, and they don't stop you, and they don't give you advice. There's no good in people who do not give sincere advice. And this is very common nowadays. There's no mutual sincere advising. They'll say, "This is not my business, it's his life, he wants to do whatever he wants to do." And and if they don't advise each other, and they fall into the problems, they start blaming each other, and they start saying, "Why didn't you tell me?" or "Why didn't you advise me?" And then they says there's no good in people that do not love those who offer sincere advice. And then he says there's no good in people that do not love those who offer sincere advice. And there are people like that. They have friends, but as soon as you advise them about something, they become angry. They're friends, but as soon as you advise them, as if you've thrown like hot water at them, they cut you off. They cut their relationship with you completely. They might even block you. I just gave an advice, and they become like harsh towards you. And there's no good in people that do not give sincere advice, and there's no good in people that do not love those who offer sincere advice. Like there's some people who love righteous people, but they don't like those who make things right. This is why you should accustom yourself, and we should accustom ourselves that 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 whenever a person comes to you to give advice, you should be happy. You should be happy. Make yourself be happy when a person comes. You should say, "May Allah reward you. Thank you so much. May Allah bless you. You've done a great service." And the one who advises you, keep him close to you. Make him from those who are your closest friends, especially if he's someone who advises you before you asked and his advice was in the right place. This person you don't want to lose. On the contrary, you should make him be closer to you. You should make him from your closest friends. Friends for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. the many situations that a person goes through, that that you find that there are very few who would give you advice for the sake of Allah. And every one of us should take himself into account. Look in the past 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. Did you find anyone who gave you advice with sincerity, with truth? Very few. Very few. The benefits of brotherhood for the sake of Allah, true brotherhood for the sake of Allah, you'll find this brother that from the things that are that he will be known for is that he will advise you for the sake of Allah, and there won't be any debate or alhamdulillah, Allah has honored Habib Hussain for having brothers for the sake of Allah. That Habib said that for decades they've been advising one another, even before mobile phones. They used to send letters to each other, written letters. When Habib was in Egypt, in Azhar, if a traveler would come to Cairo, he would tell Habib that he has a letter from so and so, and Habib would be so happy to read those letters, and he would be longing for them, and then there would be mutual counseling and advices in those letters. So faith increases, the sweetness increases from both, from the one counseling and the one being counseled, because the one who is counseling you loves you, and when you accept that counsel, then you're beloved. So it increases your love. And Habib will tell us something, that this person who used to send letters to Habib, that we still have mutual counseling in dreams. 2-3 days ago, Habib saw him and he was giving him advice in the dream. So these things are priceless. These things are priceless. As Habib said, advices, counsels can come to you in your dream. Without, you might be worried about a particular matter, and it's in your mind a lot. For instance, a person wants to buy a particular thing. He wants to buy something. He wants to buy a mobile phone, and then he sees in his dream your sheikh or your brother for the sake of Allah, and he saw that mobile and he chucked it in the bin. This is an advice. It means don't buy it. So the advice is direct sometimes. Do it or don't do it. This is strong advice and more clear. But sometimes it's through some actions, some signs. For instance, you have a particular issue and it's important, and you asked Habib in the dream. Habib came to you and you asked him your issue, that you asked him about the issue that you have, and then he turns away from you, or he's angry whenever you ask him. That also means that the answer is no, don't do it. Prefer the truth in every situation and you will benefit. Prefer the truth in every situation and you will benefit. Meaning, truthfulness is a means of being safe. Whatever the ends, of course, whatever there are exceptions. Of course, when there's great harm. But we're not saying lie in those situations. We're saying there's other ways to go about it. But he's saying prefer the truth. Because, for instance, there were to be a problem, and this problem For instance, you were part of that problem. If they were to ask you, did you see, meaning let's say there was a theft, and then you were asked and you saw that theft, but you were afraid that if they asked you and you told them, and then you would be you you'd be in a bigger problem. Um, and then you are afraid that if I tell what I saw, I'll be in big problems. But if they find out that you're lying, then you'll be in a bigger problem. And even if, let's say, you did lie, and 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 you were saved, and nothing happened to you, but on the day of judgment you will not be safe. And they were saying the most important thing that you should be true. And we're not talking about truth with Allah. We're talking about true to yourself. Are you happy with yourself? And be true. Sit with yourself. You prayed Isha. Say to yourself, ask yourself, is with this prayer, do you expect to come close to Allah? What kind of prayer is this? Do you think Allah will love you for this prayer? Oh, wretched soul, be true with yourself. Be true in your worship. Take yourself into account. How wrong this is. Do you know that you merely taking yourself into account, Allah Azza wa Jalla will hear this discourse with yourself, and He loves to hear you take yourself into account. On top of that, He would boast about you. He would say to in His presence, "My slave, my servant, is taking him or is reproaching himself for my sake." Meaning, let's say you keep failing, and your soul keeps overcoming, but that shouldn't stop you from reproaching yourself, like by saying, till when will you carry on sinning, till when will you carry on in this matter? And then after you reproach yourself, then you complain to Allah, and then Allah says to the angels, look at my slave, he reproaches himself for my sake. He complains to me about himself. And how many times have we mentioned the words of Imam al-Haddad, where he says, "Oh, ya nafs, ya wayha nafs al-ghawiyya," and then he complains, "Oh Allah, this wretched soul has taken over." This is Imam al-Haddad. He's saying that my soul, I'm not able to overcome it. Firstly, Imam al-Haddad reproached it by saying, "Woe to you, O wretched soul." He's addressing himself by saying, your purpose is just fame and wealth. And then he complains to Allah, "Oh Allah, it has overtaken me." So firstly, I've reproached it, I've blamed it, I've scolded it, but now I'm complaining to you, O Allah. And then he says, "Kadastantuka, I seek your help." These are beautiful and simple words, but they're deep. Prefer the truth in every situation and you will benefit. Why? Because if you were to lie and it would be exposed that you're a liar, then it is more severe. It is more severe than you being punished for your truth. To be punished for being a liar is worse than being punished for being true. So if you're punished for being true, is not as bad as you being later on exposed as a liar and then punished. In every situation, you will benefit. Be true with your sheikh. Don't be fake in front of your sheikh or attribute work to yourself. This person cannot be with the sheikhs. Habib Ali says, always be uh, by the side, always be looking at your shortcomings. Move away from excessive extremes and you will be safe. As the Prophet ﷺ said, leave but from the goodness of one's faith is that he leaves that which does not concern him. So move away from unnecessary things, meaning don't get involved in things that don't matter, that don't mean that are not your concern or your responsibility. But if there's something that is related to harm that you can say, then you need to speak about it, and then you will be safe. How would you be safe? You'll be safe from people accusing you of spying and prying. Verily, honesty leads to righteousness. Be true with yourself, be true with your wife, be true with your children, be true in your work. Verily, truthfulness leads to righteousness, and righteousness is basically a all-encompassing word that refers to good deeds, and righteousness leads to the pleasure of Allah Most High, without doubt. And lying leads to profanity or obscenity or crimes, which is fujur. If we were to explain what fujur is, if let's say lying, just to draw an example, if lying was, let's say, impurity like najis, like filth, then fujur would be like a swamp where there's stench, a swamp. So the one who lies, he's like filth, but it would lead to a trash or a junkyard, or not junkyard, but a swamp. Also, do you want to sit with someone whose clothes are stinking, and he smells and stinks, and his breath stinks, and he's covered with filth? You might expel him from your house. So lying, when a person lies, then this disgusting smell comes out of his mouth that the angels can see and smell. Like smell is so bad that you won't be able to sit with him or be near him, and you won't be able to be happy with him. Similarly, lying. So for this reason, the what leads to fujur is lying a lot. So if you see a person who's a fajr, who's a big criminal or a big sinner, he's not just a liar, he's a kadhab, he's a perpetual liar. Fujur means someone who is who does many major sins. He's a fajr. We ask Allah to protect us and save us from that being in that state. And Abdullah bin Abbas, may Allah be pleased with him, both said, do not talk about things that do not concern you. Now this has a lot of explanation that we could postpone to the next lesson. We ask Allah that He makes us benefit from these counsels, and we ask Allah that He makes us benefit from what we heard and grant us a heart that is present and a tongue that is always in remembrance. With the state of Al-Fatiha. Al-Fatiha. Giving advice is easy. What's difficult is accepting advice. For this reason, a person should ask Allah Azza wa Jal that He makes us, grants him a heart that is acceptance, or a soul that is accepting of advice. What? And this is an important question. May Allah reward you for asking this question. Why does the human soul reject advice? For reasons. And from one of the reasons is that he sees himself that he will consider himself less than the one who's advising him. If a person thinks he's less or more complete or perfect, he won't be guided. And then he starts thinking that the one who is advising him wants to belittle him or wants to make him look embarrass him. And this is from Shaitan's whispers. And even if he is intending that, it's none of your business. I mean, you will take the advice. Sometimes a murid wants advice and istikhara from his sheikh, but sometimes the sheikh does not respond. So how does a murid have etiquette by not asking the sheikh again? Firstly, with regards to istikhara, it's not good for a murid to ask his sheikh to make istikhara for him. In our methodology, with the Alawis, the Bani Alawi, the istikhara is for the person himself. So it's not good etiquette for a murid to go to a sheikh and say, "Oh sheikh, make istikhara for me," as if he's saying, "You pray istikhara." But what would you do? You just sit by like that. So we say, what is intended from istikhara is to show your humility before Allah. For a murid, for a Muslim in general, that he returns to Allah, he turns back to Allah. This is the first point. As for taking advice, if let's say the murid asks the sheikh and the sheikh hasn't given him advice, then that means that the sheikh has been merciful towards him, and he's opened the door for you to make your own decision, or think about what's good for you. Or maybe the sheikh did not see any particular direction for this affair, it wasn't opened up for him. So if the murid does not see a response from his sheikh, then that means you need to go and uh, uh, go take advice from other people and make istikhara, such that meaning there's more options for you now. Meaning, if you didn't see any sign in your sheikh where he was refusing or rejecting, usually if a person when he takes if a person takes advice from a sheikh, and the sheikh uh, if a sheikh does not respond, then it's more likely the answer is no, don't do it. Because if the sheikh saw something good, he would never not say do it. Especially if he is certain that the sheikh read your message. Because it could be the sheikh didn't get the message, whether you sent it through a letter or WhatsApp or an SMS. Sometimes Habib sends a letter or to one of his sheikhs, but it appears that he hasn't read the letter because of how many letters he's received, and then he sends letter again. So sometimes the first letter is not responded for many days because of how the great volume of messages that he's receiving. So what is worse is when the sheikh tells you to do something and you do the opposite. So if a murid, for instance, asked his sheikh and he didn't find an answer, then what should be the etiquette? That if, for instance, that he gets the chance, meaning if he knows the sheikh read and the sheikh does not respond, then he knows there's no point asking again. Meaning the sheikh has read your message. But if you're not certain, for instance, you sent the letter to your sheikh and you didn't find an answer, what should I do as a murid? So in proper manners, I send another message, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You say, Sidi, did my message reach you? If he says yes, then that's it. That means he read it. And here, as Habib mentioned earlier, that what is best is the person stops. As long as there's no response, then just be patient and wait. He's not saying yes or he's not saying no, meaning nothing has become apparent for him. The word Habib is said to two types of people in Hadramaut. For an alim, Habib, for instance, is only called to a person who is from the Ahl al-Bayt, from the Bani Alawi. So firstly, it should be from Ahl al-Bayt. Secondly, it is said to an alim, a scholar, or a righteous person. From the righteous, from the fuqaha, then he's called a Habib. Also, the word Habib is used for elderly people. So you refer to the elderly as Habib. And it may not be that he shouldn't be, he doesn't have to be alim, but in general it should be for the Bani Alawi. And in other countries they call it a sharif. So the word Habib is similar to the word Sharif, Habaib and Ashraf, like how it is in Egypt, where they say Sharif. What do you think of giving advice or taking advice over social media? It is very necessary because this is the quickest and best way nowadays. This means a person has now making use of the social media in a manner that pleases Allah Azza wa Jal. Because the social media is being used in things that displease Allah. The question was actually, what do you think of a person who gives advice over social media? As for acceptance, also, Habib advises us that a person, he does not keep giving advice and advice because it could lead to boredom and 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 make people switch off because the person, even though something good, but then some people, if they feel that they're broken every single day, there's some people every single morning they send messages, but not every message should be like a counsel. It could be something that's like a dua, for instance, or something that's positive in that regard. And don't always be someone who, and this is something really important because he's noticed something, and may Allah reward them. Their intention is good, but sometimes, for instance, they put in their social media accounts beautiful things they read in the book or a clip they saw on YouTube, and then they write these are these are these are words that affected me, but those words are like severe admonition and severe counsels. We should come with like warnings, but also come with glad tidings. Now, in social media, there people are talking so much about the trials of the end of times, the fitnas of end of times. People people are so hopeless at the moment, and people say, "I know it's the end of times. I know but we also need to lighten it for people, something that will make them hopeful, something of glad tidings, like how the paradise is for those who are uh, who 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 are feel as if they're foreigners in this age, or people who hold on to the religion in this day and age is in great reward, because especially these are things that give, these kind of words give people or teenagers or young people who are living in this digital age hope and strength, not people like us who lived in the age of the ulama. So a person should choose appropriate words and the appropriate time. Is it okay to take advice from someone whom you are not in touch with? There's no difference between a person taking advice from a man or a woman. The purpose is that the one you're taking advice from is someone who knows the topic. You could take advice from a a female, for instance, doctor, but it's you're handing over the responsibility. Can I take advice from a sheikh or an imam whom I'm not in touch with? Being in touch is not a condition. What is important is that that sheikh or that imam is someone who befits or is someone who can be taken advice from. You can send your husband or your son, or you can ask the wife of the sheikh. You can send her son or her brother or her husband or her father, or ask the wife of the sheikh to ask her husband. The most important thing is that the person should be someone who can be asked the advice from. Ahlan for that. He is someone who fears Allah. قبلنا الوداع. We've lost a leader. We lost leaders and sheikhs. What's the solution? They're still there. They're few, true. They're few, but they're still there. It may be that they are under a lot of pressure. They might complain. I've messaged Habib and he doesn't respond. Give excuses, because what's important is that you don't have a bad opinion that the sheikh has expelled you. Habib remembers one of the person who asked the Habib. He said, I sent messages. I sent messages to such and such Habib and he never responds. And then he complained to another person. The person said, my friend, that Habib is really, really busy. But let me ask someone who is close to him. Let me ask that someone who I know who's close to the Habib whether he's read your messages. So when he asked him, the person said that this sheikh gets between 600 to 900 WhatsApp messages daily. If he were to sit on his phone, he would miss his wife, his children, or neglect his wife, his children, his prayer, his Quran, his gatherings, everything he'll neglect, and he'll just be on the phone. But as Habib said, maybe he reads or he doesn't read. Maybe it doesn't reach. Some people, some people ask Habib, did you get my message? And Habib says, I didn't get my message. And he reads, checks, goes through his messages, and he doesn't find the messages. So the leaders are still there, but they're few. But hypothetically speaking, if you're in a place where there's no one like, there are no leaders, there's no people who can be followed, then you have them in their books. You can read the books of Imam al-Haddad, of Imam al-Ghazali. How can I be present when I'm sending salutations on the Prophet ﷺ? Firstly, you should know with certainty that when you send salutations on the Prophet ﷺ, he hears you. This should be certainty 1,000,000%, meaning he is present. His soul, his spirit is present. Secondly, that He not just hears your salutations, but also what you are saying. Meaning, somebody who just says Allahumma salli ala Muhammad is different than somebody who says Allah, like Allah, like what Habib said, the salutations right now. May Allah send His salutations on the beloved, on the best of creation, the best who was sent to His people. So this is obviously someone who would be more endearing, and this is someone who is mentioning the attributes of the Prophet ﷺ that were mentioned in the Quran. Also, the third thing that is um, your awareness that this Habib that you're sending salutations upon is more concerned and more merciful to you than you are to yourself. He is the one who loves you the most, who has cried for you the most, who has been hurt for your sake the most, the one who has migrated for your sake, who has prostrated before Allah for your sake, has made dua for your sake. So this is so when you, and this is the truth, so when you send salutations, you need to bring this awareness. He is the most fearful of Allah, the most gentle and forbearing and most merciful, the one who has yearned and longed for me the most, because he really did when he said, oh, how I long for my brothers, the person who has cried for me the most and made dua for me the most. So when you have this thought process, then without doubt you will have him present when you send, you'll have a present heart when you send salutations upon him. And what also helps is that you have etiquettes when you're sending salutations, meaning you have wudu, you're clean, you're covered, wearing modest clothes as much as you can. One of the questioners is saying it's a great honor that the Sheikh just reads the the messages. And the situation happened for Habib with Habib Umar. So Habib was sending him. Um, it was a night where Habib thought it was Laylatul Qadr, and Habib sent a message of longing and seeking dua that from him that this is Laylatul Qadr, and Habib was in i'tikaf at that time. And then it was the last 10 days of Ramadan, and Habib didn't get any response. Habib never said, Habib never thought that Habib, he never had a bad opinion of Habib, that Habib's ignoring me. He, on the contrary, was thinking that maybe I upsetted Habib, and Habib was reproaching himself. Maybe I did something bad, and so he was reproaching himself. So while Habib was in that state, a call came to Habib from unknown number, and it was the Sayyid Salim, the son of Habib Umar, and he wasn't in Tarim, he was in Jordan. And Habib thought he was in Tarim, but he wasn't in Tarim. He said, Salam alaikum, and he said, who's with me? And it was Salim, and he said, my father wants to speak to you. And Habib got worried, got scared. And he said, Salam alaikum. He said, the first thing Habib Umar said, all your letters, all your messages are read. After that was enough for Habib. After that, that was enough for Habib. And that was a lesson for Habib. As if he said to him that we're not firing anyone. And secondly, you should know that if I haven't responded, that doesn't mean we haven't read. If you haven't received a response, it's enough for you to know, an honor for you to know that we've read our letters. It's our honor and great It's like a crown on our heads that my name is there in his mobile, where even if he doesn't read my letter, even if he doesn't have my number saved, as long as it's enough honor for me that the message reached him. May Allah uh, make these blessings lost forever. Fatiha.